Urgent, topical, timely. Power 98.7. Getting you talking about what matters.
All right, 24 minutes now till 8 o'clock on Power Business, this Wednesday edition of the show. And we do this every Wednesday. We call it the Power Boardroom. And of course, I'm joined with my co-host, Nosipho Zulu. And tonight we look at when business shapes what we eat, it shapes how long we live. Now, in a country battling obesity, food crises, and preventable diseases, private companies, especially those in food and consumer goods, wield enormous power to change public health outcomes. And tonight we ask, will they use that power wisely, and can they turn purpose into profit? And joining us this evening is Ravi Pillay, a seasoned business leader and sustainability expert. And Ravi brings over 25 years experience across government and the private sector, from serving as the director at the Department of Trade and Industry to holding major leadership roles at Nestle, including advising the chairman and MD, leading corporate affairs and marketing. And today, he shapes future leaders as a faculty member at Gibbs, teaching marketing, sustainability, and ESG. And his journey offers the perfect vantage point to explore tonight's conversation. And he joins us this evening. Ravi, a very good evening and good to have you with us on the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be back.
So, Ravi, before we sort of jump into tonight's big questions then, let's start with understanding your journey, Ravi, from DTIC to Nestle and to Gibbs. Now, when we look back, what connects all these chapters?
Yeah, it's a good reflection point. I was in the first foreign service post-democracy in Switzerland. The mandate was to reopen the economic office in Switzerland, promote trade and investment. So very exciting time. And we had lots from value proposition to market and to sell. That led me to meet Nestle, which was one of our companies that we used as a testimonial as an investor case for South Africa. So it was a case study. And that was my linkage to Nestle. When I came back to South Africa after a year or so, joined Nestle on invitation. And then that led to the corporate affairs and marketing. So essentially this field, as I was speaking to Nosipho earlier, it was a very unknown and a fuzzy area. So who speaks to government? How do you speak to government? This whole area of stakeholder engagement. And then after about 20 years at Nestle in commercial and non-commercial and advisory roles, I decided to take a pause and just to join academia as my way of also giving back to society, and also some time to think about why is it that we could not optimize and leverage partnerships much more in a context where, in a country and in a continent where there's scope for so much of more that each stakeholder can contribute.
Awesome, Ravi. We spoke earlier, and I know you've had such an illustrious career. And I think we'll come back to probably connecting the dots around all of the different things that you've done in the conversation. But I'm very mindful of time, and I want us to really just get into the heart of today's discussion, because there is so much to unpack, and I'm just so nervous I don't actually have enough time. At some point, I wanted to cut some of your segments early and so that we can get more time. Health is a market, and not just a moral imperative. I think for some people that might be a shock, because obviously public goods are a moral imperative. It's a work of government, and then all of a sudden you say to private sector, FMCGs and so on, that health is a market, and that it's not a moral good, and that they need to be focusing in it. Do you think big business is ready to have a conversation like this, or do they even see this as an opportunity?
I think definitely. I think the businesses that are more in touch with the consumer, for sure, there's certainly resonance and acceptance that is the situation. If we look at the new consumer generation Z, and what do they want? They want companies to be seen and be doing good in order for them to have trust and to build a consumer base. So companies that save that invest in climate mitigation, that operates on a green principle, and that invests in health, for sure. From a long-term perspective, you're definitely going to build trust and then build profit as well.
And in that context, as you know, we talk about how the businesses engage then with the various generations, and as you point out, Gen Z, looking at public health, should that sort of be treated as a national economic priority? And if so, what are the obligations then under that?
For sure. It's for me, it's a non-negotiable premise to start off with. If we look at South Africa and then general Africa, our non-communicable disease stats, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc., it's really a crisis proportion. So if we're operating in a society with various stakeholders, where is your market going to come from if we have a society with health indicators that are predicting a lower lifespan? So it's almost a no-brainer to start investing today in ensuring that our lifespan and our life indicators increase and not decrease.
Interesting. I mean, you talk about, lifestyle diseases. I think, and I stand corrected here, that about 60% of deaths in South Africa are lifestyle related. And when they're lifestyle related, you can't almost ignore the role of health, nutrition, and the role of private sector, and especially foods business in that environment. Do you think that they are missing in the conversation, or they're just slow to get into the conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I don't think they're intentionally missing. I think that there needs to be a framing of them coming into the discussion with the various partners in a society. I think private sector alone cannot just go out and say, for example, start a massive education campaign on reduction in sugar. There's a framework in the country. There's a Department of Health, there's provincial departments of health, and NGOs also operating. I think there needs to be a platform of proper processes and rules in place to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach in these types of initiatives and Dumiso that you spoke about.
I mean, you talk about stakeholders, governments, frameworks, and it's quite all interesting to think about this ecosystem and potentially this coalition of the willing that should be in a room together, potentially having these discussions. And as you're just chatting in my head, I'm thinking, I mean, in 2024, 2025, we saw the foodborne illness outbreak to unsafe foods at spaza shops, and then you start thinking about spaza shops and as a whole within the township economy, informal trade, I think accounts for about 170 odd billion in food sales. And if you look at the vast number of people that actually live in the township, you start seeing the dots that there needs to be a connecting pathway here. And the question that really then comes into mind is that what would it take to start connecting these dots, particularly thinking that the people that need to be serviced, actually we saw in 2024, 2025, are affected by the slowness to action.
And that crisis you're referring to, the Naledi township kind of tragedies unfolding, and this is all to do, in our humble opinion, this lack of food safety leadership in the country at this point in time. We need to adopt a new approach, a new way of understanding that the environment has dramatically changed from farm to fork, from farm to spaza shop. There is no such divide as the so-called township economy and the formal economy. In South Africa, we live in a porous kind of system. We've got people commuting from the township into the so-called formal Santons of the world. So people are moving between places. So in terms of what's missing in this thing, once again, it's this bringing to bear this issue of food safety leadership and multi-stakeholder partnerships to ensure that if you're a CEO of a company today, you don't delegate this food safety to your microbiologists, the guys with the white coats in the laboratory. We need to bring about a new way of looking at food safety that cuts across all parts of the organization. Safety is not only physical safety and harm in the workplace, but food safety. We don't need to only talk about food safety or me coming here to other radio stations only after a food safety crisis. It needs to be on our agenda every day. 420,000 kids die every year annually from food safety incidents.
14 minutes now to go till 8 o'clock on Power Business, this Wednesday edition of the show. We're in conversation now with Ravi Pillay, business lecturer at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Joining us, that's myself and Ndumiso Mgomezulu for the Power Boardroom, and we're asking why South Africa's private sector must step up in public health. The number to dial 0861987000, or you can WhatsApp us 0833037093. To your point then, Ravi, if companies don't step up, do they not only risk then that brand trust being lost, but also losing market relevance?
For sure. If anything at all, once companies do step up and if they invest in value-adding types of services that consumers will remember, consumers never forget companies that help them in times of need. If we go back to the COVID experience and you look at all those companies that did certain types of acts of kindness and acts of brand building, consumers never forgot that. And it's a brand building exercise of note. You cannot underestimate those types. Yeah.
Certainly, not only do we see, with the foodborne diseases and the spices, but we also had the issue of listeriosis, and that was a major one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. And although that particular company, it's turned around, and not in large part to a lot of trust building exercises that they did undertake. But just on that point of listeriosis and other foodborne diseases, I'd just like to make the point that where there's a big opportunity in the country at the moment is for a more diverse multi-stakeholder approach, so that we start becoming more proactive in identification of foodborne illnesses, so that we can prevent and not react as we generally do with a lot of different problems. As we were talking very briefly with Ndumiso earlier, we need to adopt a more problem-solving methodology in many of our issues in the country, so that we don't just react to the crisis at this point in time and then move on to the next one. We saw about 2 or 3 weeks ago another child tragically died, despite all the regulation and compliance issues in place. But why did the child die despite all these things? So,
I see we're really having a broad conversation. I want to just drill it in, and maybe I'm going to borrow your knowledge coming out of Nestle and having worked in marketing, corporate affairs across. Is the problem maybe not also rethinking product formulations and re-engineering, so that perhaps at the very start the product itself needs to start speaking to a better lifestyle for a consumer, as opposed to probably starting to think about the broader context of stakeholders and bringing everybody together at the heart? Let's just get the product right.
I think it's a combination, Ndumiso. Yes, if we can formulate products that has the right micronutrient, the right level of sugar from the start, of course, that would be ideal. I think a lot of companies that have done this systematically, bringing down sugar levels, you can see the trust factor building. However, just to also talk about food illness, we look at the so-called township deaths and the Naledi kids that passed on. It was about contamination of organophosphates with chips. That's a poison. And that's got nothing to do with the food product formulation itself. We're looking at how did that organophosphate, which is illegal, come into the country. Once again, going to this methodology approach to fixing our problems, we need to follow the money and find out why is this illegal pesticide even in the country. And then once the consumer goes into a spaza shop, we need some technology players to come into the market. We spoke about AI, blockchain, etc. When you walk into a spaza shop, surely from a tech point of view, we should be starting to invest in saying, can my cell phone detect radiation levels of this particular product, as an example? Just throwing it out there for potential entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs to come up with real lively and relevant new solutions to save lives and to earn a living as well at the same time.
Let's take a look.
No, I'm just and sorry to come in here. I just want to ask, maybe, and be straightforward here, Ravi. Are you saying there's a regulatory gap that we need to think about from an enforcement point of view around safety?
No, I don't think there's I think what's going to happen is if we bring in more regulation, we're going to regulate entrepreneurs out of the economy. I think we need to get back into our cultural aspects, our indigenous practices, and even to start having food safety ambassadors in communities where we go back to the cultures of how we respect our elders. And will our elders then go to a spaza shop, do a check beforehand? And how do you create a business around this from a micro-entrepreneurship point of view? I think regulation has its role. However, I think agency back to us as consumers, to elders in the community, to also play a very big role in ensuring that there's nothing illegal in that shop for my child or my grandchild to purchase.
We're going to take some of the WhatsApp messages coming through. We've got a WhatsApp message from Mamelo saying, what role does food labeling play in what private companies are able to get away with? Ravi, what's your take?
Yeah, I think food labeling, it's been a very long debate in South Africa and how confusing it is. Some countries have the traffic light. If you've got 4 green lights, that means you've got a good product, etc. So definitely to start making, I think, the labeling more responsive to our communities for quick identification. If I'm diabetic, if the sugar level per 5 grams is more than X percentage, then I shouldn't be having it. So I think certainly a lot more to be done. And I think education at school level, at primary school level, to start understanding how to read a label is also imperative.
Ravi, maybe then this question, if you were advising a CEO today, how would you frame public health as a revenue strategy, not a compliance burden?
I think it'll be a brilliant opportunity to actually advise many CEOs that health should be the front and center of the strategy of a food company. If we can embrace that, and I think then this need and ability of FMCG to come into this discussion of food safety and food security and basically health indicators of South Africa would be so much easier. Of course, by default, if we have a healthy nation, we've got a longer lifespan, and then profitability issues also are impacted in a very systematic, sustainable way.
I mean, Ravi, I think what I'm hearing in all of the discussions and some of the nuances that you're talking about, in my head, this concept of responsible leadership keeps coming up. And whether that responsible leadership sits at a corporate level or government level or community level, it seems that there needs to be some level of responsible leadership at multiple levels. How do we ensure people start thinking and seeing themselves to be to lead firstly at that level, and then consider the idea of responsible leadership? Because certainly if I'm sitting and I'm an elder in the township and there's hundreds of spaza shops and I'm accustomed to them, why should I care and even consider and think about safety, because it's not something that's in my remit?
I think responsible leadership, let's come back to the responsible consumer. I think about the agency and what the consumer needs to demand from companies is, I want safety when I go and shop. I don't have to be caught with surprises and all these things that are happening. And I think from a industry and a FMCG perspective, this whole issue of competing KPIs and incentives, we need to relook at it from a strategic point of view. So responsible leadership, it's a very corporatized word. The long and the short of it is there's the issue of stakeholder value and not only shareholder value.
Are consumers sort of demanding enough?
No, I don't think so. I think what always is of concern to me is from our rich history of South Africa, of where we came from a undemocratic country to democratic. It was such a strategic process that happened and that unfolded. And I don't think we are still adopting that type of pre-democratic mobilization strategies to demand more from stakeholders, including government, of what we really need as a society.
I mean, what's interesting about this discussion, guys, is the fact that I mean, certainly for me, in the initial start, we started speaking about private sector and their role, and should they be seen this as a moral opportunity, I mean, beyond a moral opportunity, but a market opportunity. But Ravi is really driving home the conversation that the power needs to go back into the consumer.
Yeah.
And the consumer ought to demand so that we can start seeing a shift. And I wonder if big business is really worried about their social license to operate if consumers were to start stepping up, or if they're reliant on the fact that consumers aren't going to step up, they're not going to really consider this. They've got too many things to worry about beyond demanding healthier foods with proper food labeling. So essentially, I'm just interested here, Ravi, to think about, do you think they're worried about their social license to operate?
I think they are, and I think the longer that consumers take to shift the dialogue, the more delay it's going to happen for companies to move en masse quickly together to start catering for the needs of consumers. We see what happened, the classic examples of Kodak and other companies that didn't modernize quickly enough, and we know what happened to them. So I think it's about the consumers trying to need to mobilize faster and demand more so that companies can respond accordingly.
In closing then, could South African businesses lead a new health economy where wellness drives loyalty, innovation and profit?
For sure. I think we see it to some extent with some of the medical insurance companies, behavior economics, etc. And if you track the health indicators of those incentives, and I think if we look at diabetes, stroke, weight loss type of pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals, the way that has exploded into health benefits and revenues. So I think in the same way with health being a front and center of strategies, undoubtedly I think it could lead to our next big boom. Yeah.
And I mean, I know he said in closing, but I've got this burning question at the back of my head, because you've flipped the script somewhat around this power of consumers, and we've always known the power of the consumer. I would just wonder what it would take for the consumer to realize the power that they have in this instance, especially, from a demanding healthier foods. Especially, I'm just thinking South Africa, as vast as it is, thinking about it, what healthier food actually means, what it looks like, in the absence of somebody at least driving the conversation ahead to educate or help them to think about what healthier foods look like. I'm almost feeling like until we get to a place where they know that, they're unlikely to demand better because they don't know what better potentially could look like in the space. If you go back to the history, that example that you pulled, we knew what we didn't want. And in this instance, and I think that the healthier discussion is that it bubbles up here and there. It's not a crisis like we realized with the township foodborne diseases, and therefore they demanded something to be done. In a space where it's lifestyle and it gradually happens over time, what would it take to get the consumer to understand this? And whose responsibility is it? Is it perhaps government then?
It's a multi-stakeholder approach, not only government. Theoretically, health education, to the best of my understanding, was removed from the curriculum. So there's a gap in terms of understanding of what is healthy food. I think going back to what is carbohydrate, what is a fat, what is protein, all this knowledge seemed to have disappeared from our system. So I think there's scope, as we said earlier, a multi-stakeholder approach to looking at health in the country, and everyone having an opportunity and a safe space to contribute willingly. I think there's no reluctance from many of the FMCG companies to get involved. There needs to be a platform that can enable that and facilitate that en masse.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Ravi. Thank you so much for that engaging and insightful conversation this evening.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege.
All right, that was Ravi Pillay, business lecturer at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, joining myself and Nosipho for the Power Boardroom this evening, talking about why South Africa's private sector must step up in public health.